Hello and welcome. Before we get started, if you would like to turn on closed captions, there's the CC button at the bottom right of your screen. I'll give you a moment to do so and you can turn those on. And thank you to our closed captioners. Hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. My name is Lisa Coleman, and I'm the Senior Vice President for Global Inclusion and Strategic Innovation at New York University. Thank you for joining us for this important and timely conversation, Centering Black LGBTQ+ Narratives, a World AIDS Day event. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to honor those who've come before us, our ancestors, the indigenous peoples upon whose lands we now occupy and sit. I would also like to remember all of those who've died from AIDS. As we recognize yesterday's World's AIDS Day, and to recognize that this continues to be a global pandemic disproportionately impacting some greater than others even today. I also want to honor those lives who have been lost in historical and recent acts of anti-Black violence, including trans people, those known to us and those unknown. And I want to acknowledge those individuals who have led and worked for transformational change, especially those who are members of historically marginalized groups, who've tried and worked very hard to reimagine what the world should and must be. Please join me in 10 seconds of silence and reflection. Thank you. As I reflected on this important conversation today, I would be remiss not to mention the disparate impact that HIV and AIDS has had on Black LGBTQ+ communities globally. As painful as this reality has been over the past 40 years of HIV, ARC, all kinds of things, there is often an overwhelming focus on the deficit and death when talking about Black LGBTQ+ communities. And it's my hope that we can lean into the ways that the important role that Black LGBTQ+ people have led in HIV and AIDS movements broadly and globally, and the ways that they have emphasized the important nature of the work and also some of the opportunities and possibilities. For many Black LGBTQ+ people in HIV and AIDS movements, and for me as someone who has worked as a member of Queer Nation, and of course in the early days in the hospitals and clinics, I and many others know the legacies of the challenges in our systems, our practices that are ongoing. However, what many of us also know through our experience with loved ones, that reckoning with this virus has also served as a platform for us to uplift communities, to create art, to enact life-changing policies, to develop transformative social services, to connect and build relationships and possibilities, and so much more. One of the scholars who influenced me the most was a person by the name of Essex Hemphill. Essex was my friend. He was my professor. I still miss him. I miss both he and Marlon Riggs, who was also my professor and friend. They, with others in elegant and lyrical books, so many I can't even begin to name them all, influenced me in ways that changed my life, quite frankly, changed the trajectory of what I would do and where I would go. As an openly Black gay poet and activist, Essex explored and critically engaged his HIV status and experience as a Black gay person. He worked with others across the US, and part of the beauty of his writing was his ability to beautifully portray the intersectional realities and experiences of disease, what it means to have status and statuses, what it means to be a member of an LGBTQ+ communities, Blackness, masculinity, and he did so with such raw honesty and with radical love. In Vital Signs, a piece Essex wrote before dying of his AIDS-related illness, he writes, when referring to T cells, quote, "I didn't lose all of my T cells foolishly, and I did not lose all of my T cells erratically. Some of the missing T cells were lost to racism, a well-known transmittable disease. Some were lost to poverty because there's no money to do something about the plumbing before the pipes burst and the room flooded. Homophobia killed a few, but so did my rage and pointless furies. So did the wars at homes and the wars within," end quote. In another very famous poem called American Wedding, Essex writes, quote, "They expected us to call in sick, watch television all night, die by our own hands. They don't know we are becoming powerful. Every time we kiss, we confirm the new world coming." These quotes in particular highlight the disparate impact of HIV/AIDS, as well as the historical patterns, legacies, and intersecting systems of inequities that continue today in the still often uncounted deaths of so many marginalized queer folk. But what Essex also reminds us is that in his refusal to accept the non-Black, the non-queer expectations, we are not deficits, we are powerful. And through our connections, we grow so more even every day. And so today, as we listen to our panel and to the selected art pieces, we will of course explore some of the overlaps with the pandemic connections, COVID-19 and earlier pandemics, and the overlaps that we continue to see in some of those disparities, but also the joy and opportunities. And through this, we hope that you will leave with greater knowledge about the experiences of Black LGBTQ plus communities with HIV/AIDS, and with the inspiration that new possibilities are indeed on the horizon, coming through and with these communities through art, policy, social services, and of course, connection. We're excited for and appreciative for our continued partnership with Ubiquita Worldwide and Global Gay Men Connect on this event today. And thank you to our great partners. Thank you, Kim Knox, your terrific partner, and thank you for being here. Thank you to Michael Igodoro for your partnership. And of course, thank you to my incredible team in OGI, the Office of Global Inclusion. In particular, thank you, Monroe France, one of our OGI's stellar Associate Vice Presidents, and of course, to Christopher Griffin and Chris Woods from the LGBTQ Plus Center and the entire team at NYU. Thank you for your important work in making today's panel happen. And thank you to our panelists. You are rock stars in your own right, and we're so happy that you're here today. So now I turn it over to our MCs, Monroe and Michael. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman. As I always say, it's just such a privilege and an honor to work with you, and of course, everyone else in Office of Global Inclusion. So great to be a part of today's conversation. Just as Dr. Coleman mentioned in her opening remarks about centering Black LGBTQ plus voices and experiences right from the beginning. And as Dr. Coleman mentioned, the history of Black LGBTQ plus people has been greatly centered around the disparate impact that HIV and AIDS have had on those communities. We hope that today's program, this conversation today, which is a critical conversation, may shift the conversation focus on the role that Black, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer plus people have had in leading HIV and AIDS movements all around the globe. In addition to wanting to showcase and highlight the different narratives of our Black LGBTQ plus communities, this program also aims to highlight the relationship or the connection between the disparate and disproportionate impacts of HIV and AIDS in the current COVID-19 pandemic, which is impacting all of us globally. As expressed through narrative, which will be expressed through art, research, and through scholarship today. The experiences of Black LGBTQ plus HIV and AIDS movement leaders will resonates greatly in this current moment, as it has always done. And I'm going to just pick up from where Dr. Coleman left off related to Marlon Riggs. Of course, Essex Hemphill also had a tremendous impact in my life. And I'm going to specifically speak about Marlon Riggs, a filmmaker, a professor, a poet, and a gay rights activist who channeled his experiences as a Black man with HIV into his artistic creative creativity. His work inspired me to have a radical imagination as a young Black queer activist thinking I was doing something. Riggs helped me to see how art and creative expression can be a catalyst to make meaning of self-identity, liberation, agency, resiliency, and resistance, and recentering conversations saturated, as Lisa said, with deficit and despair about gay Black people and queer Black people. Most impactful to me was his film Tongues Untied, and of course, Black is, Black ain't. And they continue to live deeply in my spirit. He was one of the first gay Black men that I can recall that was public about his HIV status in the 80s and 90s, and using it as a source of power and self-authorship. And so Riggs shared this following quote: "As long as I have work, then I'm not going to die, because work is a living spirit in me, that which wants to connect with other people and pass on something to them which they can use in their own lives and grow from." So during today's program, we hope to highlight how work, how art and creativity can help others connect and can help them to grow. So let's talk about today's conversation, where we'll focus on the connection between how Black leaders and artists and scholars and agitators and innovators and researchers have approached current and previous health crises. We'll use data to observations on HIV and Black LGBT communities globally. Today's conversation will focus on the role of activism, artivism, and advocacy, and expressing the experiences of Black LGBTQ plus communities, and also look at creative solutions and possibilities and opportunities for Black LGBTQ plus communities leading with HIV and AIDS movements. Again, just want to thank all of our partners today, which Dr. Coleman has already mentioned. And now I would like to turn it over to, my younger brother, one of our brilliant shining stars, Michael Igadora. Michael, whom actually brought the idea to us and said, let's do this program today, and in partnership, and we were able to build the idea and the concept of today's program. Michael, I've known him for many years, and we've had the pleasure of working together in many capacities, in particular as board members in Outright International. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for joining us today, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Monroe. Thank you, everyone. Again, my name is Michael Oligodaro. I am a board member of the Global Black Gay Men Connect. I also work full-time at AVAC. AVAC is a global advocacy for HIV prevention. And like Monroe said, we're on the same board of a very nice organization that we both love very much, which is Outright Action International. So it's my pleasure to be here today. And thank you for accepting us to do this event together. And I cannot say thanks enough to Chris and Christopher for working so hard to bring this event to life. I think thank you all. So I'm just going to share a little bit about our organization, GBGMC. GBGMC was founded in 2018. It stands for the Global Black Gay Men Connect. It's a group of Black, gay, bisexual, and same-loving men forming a movement internationally to empower our communities, foster resilience against oppression, and initiate an ever-growing platform for our collective voices to be heard. So as a collective, GBGMC foster an activist-led movement with the goal of building local power to intervene in discrimination and violence inflicted on Black gay communities and men wherever they live. We strive to facilitate intentional involvement by engaging Black gay men across the globe and developing their capacity to rapidly intervene on human rights issues surrounding mental health, physical health, police brutality, immigration, HIV, and general well-being. So it's my pleasure to be part of the board and to be one of the acting EDs of this organization. I'm not going to speak too much, so I'm just going to move over to the next phase because I know we are a little bit behind of the program, which is actually an entertainment and a video by the Ubiquita Wordwide. This project is called Cyborg Evan. The short film centers the poetic and performances aesthetic of the Black and queer radical poets, traditions, and the Black urban movement rooted in the house boardroom, culture, and hip hop. Individuals, audiences, and publics are encouraged to explore Cyborg Evans' core universal themes by centering their own lives like struggles, experiences, rather than co-opting those of others. Cyborg Evan hashtag is both an invitation and a provocation that insists people, communities, and collectives start with who they are and what they have to show us, how they push through to co-create new habitable futures for themselves, their community, and worldwide. Without saying too much, I'm going to hand over to Christopher to play the pre-recorded video. Enjoy.
How might a poem ever be entered if one insists on living outside of it? As if truth ever estranges from its confession, shut off, attenuated, severed even, from the silence hoping for a quiet burial of its secrets, inside the belly of a thing is a body. Touch it. The crushed fraught grape, the burst skin of an opened chalice, the ferment lust routed towards its own becoming a swallowed, a delectable and abusable thing. Plain as evidence how hickeys come first, leave secondhand, mapping in an instant the truancy of the desired and its bruised consequence. The possessed remind of their dispossession, the lover and the scorned incite the tangled algorithms to their dangled non-local dance of the survived. Touch me here. COVID-19, 1980s come HIV 2020, unspell the undercount of the infected and the unbelieved. A mirror referees the chupacabra apart from its chimeric twin, still haunting the old AIDS mausoleum, toggling between pixel and time, betwixt Java and script. New worlds project into and out of the digital forest where screens scream now, as much for the troll as the corona, the drone, the android, the teletubby, as much as the quarantine. Here in cyborg heaven where we are all only fans of the fact, the femme, the nanosex, the trans, the zaddy, the beer, the cougar, the intersex, and the polyamorous, the non-binary codes of the sapiosanct, and the bisexual algorithms of the maroon. Here, where apples and operating systems bear less and less fruit, more and more seed spill into isolate and heartache. Pills pop, crystals smoke, the anxious and the paranoid into novel forms of forgiveness, and the unforgiven. Everyone hides behind an Instagram scene. Pandemics push portals onto the outcast fringe of the human condition. Shame and stigma snag right where the shunned escape, battered and bruised into their unweaved underground. Every box signals a beginning of a turn, a twist, an impulse, a tremor, an anguish, a horn, head, a taut arm, a wetted hand, whistle, the opened organ, call to to task the hardening fruit of the willing and the wild. The object is to get inside, beside, beneath it, get into it, test how the right entrance can make as much noise as the entered. Touch it. Every crevice, every ending objects to nothing. Zoom in, magnify how salt, pearl, water exudes for you. Behind the glass, in front the screen, in opened ear, don't it move you into your wants? Emulsified, trigger, reflex, unfold before intent attends to any theory of mine. Touch me, please. I am it, and it is not me. Blood belongs and unbelongs to the viral, the virile, the vile, the live stream clings and unclings to the breathy contour of its own ecstatic perdition. Tunnels, tides, tubes swell their miasmas into the surrounded ear. Our insides bear the implicit need to be touched, to be held, to be nursed by the enveloped suck of hot tongue and recycled wind. Touch me, please. The boxed, the unboxed, the bruised, the belonged, the looked over, the overlooked, the puddle, the oasis, the pond, the breeding ground for the succumbed and the spawned, the required, the acquired, the healed, the traumatized, the fixed, the fixated, the errand boy, the homing pigeon, the prodigals, and the return. We are what else besides a meeting ground? Heart, body, fluid, mind, touch me please. Where mask nor rubber can withstand the cover of this blood-borne alone. Laced to my sins, my art, my obsessions, my endeavors, my crimes, my longings received and down and pressed into things like me. Touch us, please. The infected, affected, the unadorned and the adored. Here, every transgression belies the perfection underbelly to every sacred push and insists we hold on and out to something, anything, holy, warmed, and divined.
What a powerful video, powerful time, but just really beautifully done. And just want to acknowledge one of our panelists whom you'll meet soon, Brad Walrond, whose video was featured in the video, which was a collaborative between Pony Zion and Ubiquita Worldwide. Just a beautiful piece. Thank you so much for sharing that with us today. What we're going to now do is move into our panel, and I have a great pleasure of introducing our panelists, whom will, after their name is shared, they'll come onto camera. You will get in the chat the longer bios. We're going to do a very streamlined introduction of each of our panelists so we can get right to the conversation. First, we have Dr. Stephanie Cook, who is an assistant professor of biostatistics and assistant professor of social and behavioral sciences at our very own NYU School of Global Public Health. Welcome, Dr. Cook. Great to have you as a part of the conversation today. Thank you. Then we also have Octavia Y. Lewis. Octavia is the MPA, is a Master of Public Affairs and an activist, advocate, humanitarian, mother, and scholar. She's also the Transgender Health Coordinator for Trans Wellness Center at Montefiore. Welcome, Octavia. Great to have you today. Then we have Greg Millett. Greg is the well-published and nationally recognized epidemiologist and researcher with a significant experience in HIV on both the highest level of federal policy development at both the White House and the CDC. Greg is also the Vice President and Director of Public Policy for amfAR. Welcome, Greg. Great to have you as a part of the conversation today as well. And then finally, our featured artist in the last video we saw, Brad Walrond. Brad is a poet, author, mixed media performance artist, and activist. His poetic performances and multidisciplinary work spans the nexus between virtual reality, identity formation, and human consciousness. Great to have all of you as a part of the conversation today. Now I'm going to turn it over to Michael to facilitate the dialogue between all of you.
Thank you so very much, and welcome everyone again. So I'm just going to jump right into our first question, which is actually going to you, Greg. I think a lot is happening right now, and we're all like, suffering between COVID-19 restrictions, but also I think the folks who have actually been in the forefront of the science or the response to COVID-19 has always been or are HIV advocates and HIV scientists. So my question to you, and actually to Octavia as well, is based on your own experiences and work, how has the response to an impact of COVID on Black people, including Black LGBT people, been similar or different to the response to HIV and AIDS epidemic? Greg, do you want to take that first? And we have less than 1 or 2 minutes for this question. So.
Sure. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it. And that was an amazing video and lead-in as well. I think that we see a lot of similarities between the response for HIV as well as COVID-19. Both of those diseases disproportionately impact Black people all across the world. But one of the things that we see in the response that are similar is one, blaming the victim. With HIV, there's a tendency to blame the victim. There's something that these communities are doing wrong that's making them at high risk for HIV, particularly Black queer communities, when that's not actually the case. There's other issues that are at play there. You see the same thing happening with COVID-19. I think the second thing that we see is less access to healthcare and access to health technologies. Whenever there are new technologies that come into play, like antiretroviral therapy or pre-exposure prophylaxis, you see that Black communities are least likely to have access to that. And we're seeing exactly the same thing with COVID-19, with Black communities being last and having access to COVID-19 testing and probably to vaccines as well. And then I think the last thing that we see that is similar between COVID-19 and HIV is a failure to recognize that this pandemic is really a syndemic. So it's interlocking epidemics that's disproportionately impacting Black communities. And also the fact that there's a contribution of social determinants of health as to why we're seeing higher rates of COVID-19 as well as HIV in Black communities. And we see this over and over again in data from the UK showing that when you factor in the social determinants of health, you see smaller disparities between Blacks and whites in terms of COVID-19. You see the same thing in the US, you see the same thing as well in Canada. And we know that social determinants of health are a major issue on the continent as well as in the Caribbean in terms of our responses to COVID-19 as well as HIV and the stigma that it's associated with it.
Yes, absolutely. So before I go over to you, Octavia, I think, at GBGMC, we just launched a report yesterday that documented how COVID-19 is having impact on Black LGBTQI people globally. And all that you just mentioned, Greg, it's just documented in that report. Like it shows like how, the social determinants are having several severe impact in terms of the lockdowns and, access to services. People cannot even go to the office anymore. Like people are having difficulties getting their medications. So we're seeing like, very similar, responses, I would say, in terms of how those lockdowns and other restrictions to COVID is actually having impact on people access to HIV and AIDS services. So it's very, very, very intriguing. So Octavia, I know you work in the community, so you have even more experiences in this kind of thing. So what would you want to share to add to that, to what Greg said, from your own experience?
No, I definitely piggyback on everything Mr. Millett said. I definitely want to highlight that, yes, even though we know the social determinants of health, we still, as healthcare leaders, tend to still go astray when we know that those determinants are there. And prime example being, when you talk about COVID, who were the first people that were able to get testing for COVID? There were stars, there were prominent or affluent, Caucasian people, but poor and brown people, we were actually being turned away. And then when they were creating COVID testing sites, a lot of them were drive-through sites, which again, limited access to poor, disenfranchised brown and Black people. So again, when we talk about creating measures to help society, I also ask, like, what part of society are we there to help? Because it definitely has not been, people that look like me, people that, suffer the same disparities as I have, even though that they, have been greater access to certain things. It has not always been distributed equitably amongst our community.
Yeah, I think, just going back to a lot of the things that I think as Black people, being Black LGBT or being Black people in general, the way COVID has impacted us is very similar to the way HIV has impacted our communities. And there's one underlying issue there, that it's discrimination, it's based on race and based on culture, it's based on where you live, it's based on what you have access to and what you have access to. So it's like, it's comes down to the same issue. And to my next question is actually for Stephanie and actually Greg as well. So just going back to HIV, just briefly. So we know there is no global comprehensive data on HIV in Black LGBT communities. I know there are like, several data out there. That's sort of groups like there's data for Black gay men in the US, there's data for Black women in the US, there's data for Black LGBT people abroad in Africa and the Caribbean, but there's no collective data on how HIV and AIDS has impacted or, in terms of infections rate, in terms of, deaths among Black LGBT people globally. There's no one place or there's no one source of information that we all can go to say, hey, this is what we can know. For instance, maybe 1 in 2 Black people globally have been infected every day with HIV. There's no one source of that. Would you think that is an important thing we should have, or is there anyone out there that is actually out there that maybe I don't just know about?
No, it's definitely something important that we should have that unfortunately we don't have. And when you think about it, when we think about HIV and we think about the fact that Black people are most at risk for HIV, what you usually hear is about Black heterosexuals. And then when you talk about communities that are sexually marginalized communities, such as LGBT communities, you're usually thinking about white communities. So unfortunately, Black LGBT communities really fall within the cracks. And it's the same thing that happens with trans communities in terms of data. When we talk about data for trans communities, it's usually either coming out of data from men who are sex with men or data that's coming from cisgender women. So it's really problematic that we do not have these data. And one of the big problems that I see is that, particularly in Europe, you don't really disaggregate data by race or ethnicity. You look at data from France, Sweden, many of these places, they do not, even though they have data on COVID-19, they have data on HIV and everything else, they refuse to disaggregate data by race and ethnicity. And that's a big problem. Then there, of course, we have places such as, the African continent and many different countries there, as well as in the Caribbean, where you can disaggregate data by LGBT status, but the problem is stigma and the degree to which people will even begin to identify that they're LGBTQ because of the stigma that's associated with it and the possibility of collecting those data, which makes it very difficult. So I think all of these things come together, make it difficult for us to really track how HIV is impacting Black LGBTQ people all over the globe.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. I think, I've been speaking about it a couple of weeks ago, and someone was mentioning to me like, Michael, this sounds very racist when you're asking people to disaggregate data by race. Like we have data by communities, like Black LGBT people, gay men, transgender people. We have those data, but trying to disaggregate data by color of the skin, it becomes very, problematic. And I'm like, well, this is not, it shouldn't be, right? Because we know the communities that are most at risk with this virus, and we should have access to those sort of data. And saying we should have data by race shouldn't be problematic or someone feeling you're racist or not. So, Stephanie, I'm just going to go over to you. I know if you want to add anything to that as well.
Yeah, so just to build on what Greg said, I think that it's a bit problematic that we don't have, one combined data source, but we do have really good sources of data in different places that we can draw upon. And I just want to draw our attention to the ways in which we have to think more critically about the way people think about race and how race is socially constructed in different contexts, because this is the real driver around why governments or systems may refuse to disaggregate race. So what Greg was saying before is that we really need to think about syndemic conditions, and we really need to think about the ways in which these different conditions operate together to kind of produce vulnerability among LGBT people of color. And so one of the things that I've been thinking about more critically lately is, when we have these large data sources in, say, Europe, France, that do talk about, HIV, and thinking more critically about the ways in which they talk about social determinants of HIV. So thinking about poverty and maybe ethnicity a little bit more than race, considering how race is socially constructed and thought about in Europe. So I'm very interested in trying to work within the current regimes that we have to think more critically about how we can understand how these social determinants of health are really driving HIV disparities, specifically among LGBTQA of color. And I think that if we continue to do that, at, say, my level, but also work at policy levels to really try to, get more data and more collective data, then we can have a clear picture of what we really need to focus on in public health for intervention.
Yeah. So I guess for me, I think, the reason why I also think this data is really, really important, it's because for instance, I worked in Nigeria before I moved to the US for a lot of years, and in HIV. And my first interactions with, public health advocates or funders or donors from the global north was white people mainly. And I didn't think like there were Black-led organizations in the US that were engaged around HIV issues, right? It was like the white donors that was the person that came to Africa to talk about HIV. And a lot of us sort of grasp to that, and sort of a lot of our attention, all of our work are based or focused with white-led organizations. So that's sort of like, it goes back to the data issue, because we have to have a way to all work together. Like Black people globally need to find a way to work together. And that's why I'm so excited about the future of GBGMC, even though it's focused on just Black gay men only. But I think we need to find a way, Black women, Black lesbians, Black people globally, to find a way to work around the issue of COVID access, because I know we have an issue right now with vaccines. Like, if COVID vaccines, who's going to take it, right? Like, how are we going to create awareness and demand? Black people do agree everywhere. I would say there are some issues about us trying to get a vaccine, if we even win at all. So what are we looking in those aspects? Say Black leaders globally need to stand up and start, clearing those myths that people have about the vaccine now, so that Black people globally can have access to it. Also know the best information, that the information is not coming from white people that they don't trust. And that, they might not believe what they're saying. That's just on the side way. I'm going to actually move over to our next question. Before I do though, Greg, I know you work in policy and you've worked in government for a long time. What do you think we can do to have more access to data, or to have more access to this sort of data?
I think one of the things that we need is, to make sure that people continue to publish studies showing various communities at high risk. I mean, part of the reason why I published one of our study on African Americans and COVID-19 is because at the time in May of this year, 78% of the data were missing for COVID-19 data by race and ethnicity. So what we did was something where we just looked at those counties that were disproportionately Black, and we looked at COVID-19 in diagnoses and found high rates of COVID-19. So there has to be innovative ways of bringing these data to the government, make sure that it gets national attention as well as media attention, and it shines a light on the fact that we have to disaggregate these data more. We also need to have more forums like this one. We need to have more surveys like you have done with GBGMC and others, to show that the data are available. This is not something that is magical. It's not something that's elusive. It's available. We can collect it. so that we can really press our leaders in our respective governments to make sure that these data are available and to help guide our responses.
Thank you. And Brad, so I think you work in art and I'm very activist as well. So where do you see activism, arts and advocacy happening to say or to serve and represent Black LGBT communities experiencing or expressing HIV globally? Do you have a model or strategy that we can use? Like what kind of ideas could you want to share that you think like where activism and art globally with Black people and Black LGBT in particular can come together to form a way to sort of express ourselves and also share our information?
It's interesting centering this conversation around data and around systems, and with the clear understanding that in the context of pandemics, whether it's HIV, whether it's COVID, systems fail Black and brown people, period. And so when Dr. Lisa kind of opened up with booking existential and how we bring our whole selves to this place because there's no other option. And I think that's where activism centers, and it kind of pushes, it really acts to me as a vanguard in which systems have to end up following if there's going to be any efficacy, any reprieve. So I've had the opportunity to do work in Sao Paulo and in Taiwan. And one thing that, it comes in bold relief for me is that we have a global pandemic. It's one illness, but there's micro pandemics. There's each place, each context is on a different life cycle. And so it's important to be aware of that. And that's part of where the activist voices really stand out. In Sao Paulo in particular, there's this group called Festa Amem, and it's kind of like a full service arts-led space centering HIV positive bodies. And so they have parties that are open to the whole community, but the notion of health and Blackness and living positive lives and healthy lives centers the work that they do. So they also do like interventions in museums where they have public talks, and they're being public around their status while also inviting publics into the conversation. When I was in Taiwan is a bit of a conundrum because on one hand, they have excellent healthcare that's free and available to everyone. At the same time, this was just last year, just the level of stigma is so high. And it reminds me of the 90s in New York. And so stigma is such a, perhaps with HIV in particular, it is such a barrier in so many ways. And I think it's only activism, honestly, that helps people push through those things, and the kind of courage that activists show, simply if not because they cannot depend on anything else if wellness is the goal. And so that's what activism brings to bear.
Thank you for that. So I guess one last question for everyone on the panel, actually. So as you envision the future, what creative solutions or possibilities do you imagine for Black LGBTQI+ communities as it relates to HIV/AIDS pandemic? Any of you can start. Just quick one thing. What do you think? What does the future look like?
To be honest, that's a hard question, and I've thought about that many a time. And even now, just sitting here thinking about what everyone has said, and I see that we always circle, and again, it's going back to these social determinants of health. We never really talk about like how are we going to fix these social determinants of health, and we never really talk about like people being in places of authority that have these conversations on a daily basis, how they know how they are impacting poor, brown, and black and disenfranchised people. We don't talk about like, oh, well, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to move into getting this accomplished. And as a person that oftentimes in both worlds, because as a person living with HIV, a person of trans experience, like when I have the opportunity to share spaces or be in the room, it often sometimes makes me feel small in a sense because no, I have not had the access to all of the research and all of the data, but I have had access to my friends that have had to sell their medications because of food insecurity is real. I have had, those conversations with, friends that again, 8 of them had to sleep in a 1 bedroom apartment because rent is, not sufficient enough or there's not enough, adequate spaces for them to go. So like all of those things are real. So when you ask that question, what does the future look like? I couldn't honestly tell you because we still have the have and have nots even when we have these conversations. And even when we talk about, again, going back to these social determinants of health, we have those that know about them that can recite them in their sleep. And then we have those that are living them. And again, sometimes there's a disconnect because we don't always connect with one another. And again, when we talk about ethics and, Marlon and other people that were in the struggles, like sometimes I often wonder, would they now look at the future and be like, this is what my work has led up to? And again, it just makes me, again, feels a little indifferent sometimes. It makes me, offer a pushback. It makes me sometimes want to run and hide because when we have these conversations, we don't always include all of those that are living in the struggle. And again, I know how important research and data is, and now working in the healthcare field, but that doesn't always interpret to those that are living and struggling those disparities because the connection is not always there. So again, when we talk about what does it look like, honestly, I could not tell you at this point.
That is deep but real. Thank you for making this conversation very real for all of us. So thank you for that. Anyone else, Greg?
Yeah, I'll follow up really quickly on what Octavia mentioned. I mean, to make it more concrete, for instance, in the United States, the US Senate alone, when you take a look at the composition of the US Senate and the people who are part of the US Senate, as well as the staff, only 14% of the staff are Black and brown, despite the fact that 40% of the country is Black and brown, which means that all these policy decisions from healthcare to positions around marginalized populations and policies, all of that is being made by people who don't necessarily look like us. And that has implications. But, there's a part of me that is hopeful. And why I'm hopeful is because the demographics, at least in this country, are changing. They're changing rapidly. That by 2044, this is going to be a majority country of Black and brown people. And all of those things that we're seeing in terms of these policies and who makes the policies and who's in the room, all of that has to change. It's just going to have to change by necessity. So that makes me, really hopeful. I'm also hopeful when I see what's taking place on the continent, in various African countries. I mean, Africa's on the rise. Yes, we're having setbacks because of COVID-19 economically and everything else, but very much on the rise. When you think about the future, and where we're going to be looking at the future is definitely going to be on the continent, and the continent really shaping many of the experiences that are taking place worldwide. So I feel much more hopeful that there's a greater recognition of the diaspora. There's a greater recognition of the ties that we all have with one another across continents. That's going to be something that's going to be useful to help us catapult and address all of these issues, COVID-19, HIV, and others in the future.
And just to piggyback on what Greg and Octavia said, I think that, from my perspective, I think about a lot of stuff, a lot of the issues that we're talking about with a public health lens, with a identity politics lens, but also with a positive psychology lens. And so in a lot of the work I do and in a lot of the community work I do, I try to understand how we can think about our relationships and developing those relationships and thinking about how to rely on friends, families, and other aspects of our networks to really try to kind of buffer, you know, the negative effects of discrimination and these social determinants of health, you know, on disease. And I think that in the future, we'll stop, or the government or whomever will stop only pouring money into things that affect brown and Black people when, you know, something's on CNN about it. And instead, we will have a voice in the room, and there will be a constant flow of financial resources and other resources to really help us not only understand what the drivers of HIV are, for example, but also understand how we can really capitalize on things like relationships and what are the positive aspects of our lived experiences that we really, really can focus on if we want to reduce the impact of HIV in our communities.
On what everyone has said, and Stephanie as well, you know, I've been fortunate to do HIV work since the 90s. And, you know, I left my craft, my creative life for quite some time, and coming back to it, I really did not anticipate how my HIV work would become centered in some ways, but how it makes me reflect on these histories is that, you know, when I close my eyes and I imagine the beings embodied who I have been privy to work with, to live among, to share space with, there honestly is no more beautiful and courageous of a community than Black, brown, queer beings who have been impacted by HIV. And there is a particular kind of resonance in power that we carry, and so those are the things that I call upon, that I immerse myself in, because it is really a certain kind of power. And I think that there's so many layers of analysis, but I think especially in this dispensation, it's important to really start from a strength-based approach. And we are a value added. We are a contribution to civilization, whether folks understand it or not. And it's our work to make them know it. It's our work to share what our struggles have been, how we've grown, how we've overcome, and the contribution that we have to offer society. And so I'm particularly encouraged because we are too damn gorgeous and too damn powerful. And this is what these experiences have shown me every day.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Thank you everyone on the panel. It was so nice to speak to you all. I know I've certainly learned a lot on this panel, and I hope you guys have enjoyed it as well. Monroe, over to you to do the Q&A.
Thank you, Michael. And so I know we're running short on time, and I'm feeling very fired up by all the comments that were made. And of course, then ending with Brad's comment about we're too damn beautiful. And so this is where I'm going to lead to two questions from our audience at once. We'll just wrap up with these two questions before we go into our final piece in the closing. So I'm going to give these two questions together, and you can take whatever direction you want, and we'll hear from a few of you. So one of the questions is around sort of what should we be doing as individuals? Like what, like, you know, so there are probably artists here on the, like here in the part of the conversation, there are activists, there may be policymakers, there may be doctors, there may be educators and scholars or students. So what's like, you know, on a localized level, if you were encouraging people to take action, right? A lot of us are talking about action now. What action would you want people as individuals to take to help move the needle, to give greater access to Black LGBTQ plus people that are HIV positive or addressing the pandemic? And then the other question from a scholar who said they've, you know, done research in Hemphill, Essex, they've done research with Riggs, and they're wondering what other resources should they be accessing in this conversation. So an action people should be taking or a resource that you would encourage for people to access as scholars in this work? And so I'll just open it to whomever wants to respond to either one of these questions or together. No one go first. All right, I'll call out someone. Brad, go ahead. What's an action or a resource? Yeah.
I think there's a kind of truth telling that our bodies do. And I think we should lead with that first. I was one of the first people in the country to start group interventions targeting HIV negative men. And I had no public health background at the time. But my first instinct was to tap into my network. And out of that, within a few months, I had 2 groups running, groups that folks were funded across the country that were unable to get done, And I'm not saying that to be bragging, in as much as there is light in us. And because of the context that we're in, it is the truth in our bodies that are going to lead us through it. And so I think it's important for us to hone in on that and to move in that direction. And I also am thinking about having come back to my creative life and in some ways coming back to HIV prevention in different contexts. And feeling astonished by our young people. And there's a way in which you're always coming out. You're always discovering something new. And just following and immersing myself in their voices gave me healing that I didn't know I needed. Yeah. So be open to those voices and those inner truths. Follow them. There's light there.
Thank you. The power of youth. Thinking about Whitney right now, I believe in the children, right? Our future. They are. I'm going to turn it, because we probably don't have time for everyone to respond, but maybe Octavia, if you have any further reflections on an action or a resource that you go to in your work that you would encourage others to access. And we're going to be putting resources on our website after today's conversation related to Black and LGBTQ plus people and around HIV, including HemPhil, including work from RIGS, et cetera. But Octavia, any other suggestions from you or thoughts?
No, I guess the only thought that I would leave people for, and this is, a motto that came from my mentor, is people do not care how much you know until they know how much you care. So thank you all.
Thank you. Powerful. Greg, Stephanie, any closing thoughts from you all?
I think for me, it's just, really quoting Teddy Roosevelt, do what you can where you are with what you have. And it's really, I think for all of us, our spheres of influence, the types of things that we can do are all different. So it's really hard to say what is the thing that we all should be doing. But what I do know is that if we are all able to do the things that we can do within our own spheres, that collectively we can make a difference. And that's what we need to do.
Thank you. Stephanie.
Same thing. I really think, just to, not beat a dead horse, but I really think that we need to really focus on a positive psychology perspective and think about more creatively about what we can do to really foster relationships and, support our mental health, because, we're trying to do things at every level, like Greg said, but, one thing that we need to continuously do, especially among Black and Brown LGBTQA of color, is protect our mental health and foster relationships to help get, through life.
Thank you. So our mental health, remember the youth, and that we have it all in us. Your sphere of influence from where you are. And then Octavia's point is about how you treat people, right? And so we got to think about how we treat people. And I hope that through this current pandemic and the ongoing HIV pandemic, we use this moment of disruption to reflect on what do we need to be doing differently. And when people say, let's go back to normal, I'm like, was it ever normal for Black queer people? like the shit we, I mean, excuse my language, the stuff we lived through before was not normal. And so I think that just recognizing and remembering that, you know, we use, how do we use this moment to rethink and innovate and to make change. And so thank you all for your incredible reflections, and thank you for your wonderful thoughts and your participation. Dr. Coleman just wrote fabulous. Thank you everyone, absolutely wonderful. And so really appreciate all of you for giving your time today. We're gonna move into a video, a close, another artistic piece from CJ Run, who's, the performance is called Here From Now. CJ Run is a 22-year-old non-binary rapper and songwriter born in Germany and raised in the UK. We're gonna turn it over to this video before our closing comments.
Anytown, USA, where the cities are miles away. Got 3 high schools and a district. In church, better watch what you say. Friday nights in a Walmart parking lot. We got way more churches than restaurants. In the heart of Dixie, I don't belong. I met this one and she makes me feel home when I'm gone away. Just a foreigner looking for motives. Nobody notices what a joke this is. So we cope by repressing all of this. All a myth or reality. How can it be if you're right here next to me? Right here next to me. I've got the keys to my mum's car, but we can't go too far. All I really want is both your hands up on my shoulders. Tell me that you love me and you'll never let me go. Even when it feels like me and you, the world alone. I heard your father, the pastor, doesn't want his daughter falling for somebody who could pass for son or daughter. Tell me that you love me and you'll never let me go. Even when it feels like me and you, you're the one I aim to please. Watch you flick and flip with ease. Number 2, no onions, please. Wait, how come you never like onions? Do you really want to go to the function instead of just kissing and touching? Feels like the first time every time we're touching. No cascada when you want to link up before or after. I got a keys to the drive right now. Means we can leave, we could die right now. I don't want to sink or be down and out, but I'm reaching a brink and I might just blow. They don't get it and we can't sweat it. White religions are so embedded, needle threaded, but that's alright. I'm just shocked but not surprised. I need to know for certain, will you be mine tonight or forever? I'm hoping we can make this last forever. Said and done and our time has come. It's you. It's always been you. Check it out. Wait, I've got the keys to my mum's car, but we can't go too far. All I really want is both your hands up on my shoulders. Tell me that you love me and you'll never let me go. Even when it feels like me and you, the world alone. I heard your father, the pastor, doesn't want his daughter falling for somebody who could pass for son or daughter. Tell me that you love me and you'll never let me go. Even when it feels like me and you. See, I would move a mountain for the view of you. And isn't this what lovers are supposed to do? Everything and anything to be close to you. Now I feel like my strongest when I'm holding you. And if we drive long enough, I bet we'll be out in a second. Tell me what you reckon. About to floor it, about to rev it. Yeah, we gotta go now. We gotta go. And we say yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. We gotta go.
I am just so happy we've been able to include these artistic pieces in today's conversation, because art is definitely a way in which that we found liberation and understanding. That piece was amazing by CJ Run. And again, apologies for the bit of the lag with the technology, doing the best we can to bring you these things in real time. I am so excited to now bring forward one of my sisters, and that I've known probably for about 2 decades, growing up here in New York City. Kim Knox to share a bit about Ubiquita Worldwide. And she's been instrumental in bringing programs, and our partnership with NYU and Ubiquita is growing and expanding. And so I'm very excited to bring Kim Knox forward before we do the final closing to share a bit more about Ubiquita. Kim, please.
Hey, how are you?
Hi, sister.
Hi, how are you? Thank you guys so much for having us. Definitely, Ubiquita Worldwide is definitely really excited to be on this ongoing and evolving partnership with NYU around content and art and culture and all of these great things. So this was an awesome conversation. And it's so interesting. I mean, my company, what we do, we are predominantly a production company. We started out in 2000 as one of the first all-female DJ residencies in the city. We had a party called Ubiquita that now has evolved into Ubiquita Worldwide, which is really more, my work has now moved more into production, multidisciplinary, you know, from live events, concerts, touring, now into content, television, but also from a public health perspective, we have also decided to utilize our platform to start to address some of these same issues that we were discussing in this conversation, just as it pertains to access to Black and Brown folks, you know, as far as healthcare. And how we can possibly be able to help to shift those health inequities. And I think those health inequities, you know, stem from all of the different pre-existing conditions that we have always suffered from or been more, you know, more susceptible to. So I think, you know, there's a lot of correlation between everything that we have seen Black and Brown folks, LGBTQ folks, and everyone else that are going through the HIV/AIDS pandemic globally. For over the course of the last 30 years, the things that we have witnessed now help to give us some level of a guiding, like, you know, a guidepost around how we are going to be dealing with COVID-19. I think when we're speaking about vaccination and things like that, that idea of rebuilding trust for Black and Brown communities in medical interventions and in any level of inoculation, vaccination. I know we're all very scared, you know, and suspect around what potentially these governments or, you know, potentially non-white spaces and around medicine and how they are going to deal with the rebuilding of trust within Black and Brown communities when it comes time for vaccines. So I do think that we've tried to utilize our background in media and our background in entertainment and culture to try to utilize different ways of getting people's attention on this issue, and building much more awareness around the reasons that we have kind of come to this place, especially now with COVID-19 and we're dying 2 times the rate. You know, it is something that has to be addressed right now for our very survival. And I feel like there's a lot to be learned from everything that we've already done and all of the advancements that were made through LGBTQ activists and medical professionals and all of the folks that have come together along, you know, throughout the whole struggle within HIV/AIDS movements.
Thank you. That's powerful. And this is, I think, going back to this question around what can we do, I believe partnerships are critical in this moment. Absolutely. And that we are Ubiquita, you know, you, as you mentioned, have the production and, like, you know, and being able to bring together artists and being able to create a platform, like, you know, for these conversations and, you know, being able to partner with us. And then we have Global Black Men, like, and Michael's, like, an organization and the work he's doing. I think this work truly needs to be done deeply in partnership. And this is why I love my job, because we get the opportunity to work with wonderful people like you and Michael and everyone that was on the panel today. Thank you so much, Greg. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Octavia. Thank you, Brad. Thank you again to the whole team in the Global Inclusion Office of Global Global Inclusion. Of course, Dr. Coleman, Chris, Christopher, and our LGBTQ+ Center, and everyone else. Thank you for joining us today. Again, this event has been recorded. It will be made available to you on our YouTube channel in the coming days. And once again, visit the NYU Office of Global Inclusion. We have many resources on our website, and we'll be continuing to add resources relevant to this conversation and many other conversations about innovation and inclusion and how do we create radical change. And so that create space for all of us to have self-determination and liberation. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you again, Kim. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Take care.